There's a general rule in Dynasty that the earlier you trade for rookie picks, the better value you're going to get. But even now, just a few months away from Dynasty rookie drafts, there are still a lot of players that I'd be happy to flip for 2025 picks. I don't know if it's just the perception that this is a weak class or what it is really, but looking at startup ADP, looking at sources like Fantasy Calc, it seems like it's not too late to get your hands on some of these 2025 rookie picks. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's get into it. All right, so today I'll be suggesting one player that I would trade for each 2025 first round pick. And these suggestions are based on my rankings, of course, but also Dynasty Data Lab startup ADP, completed trades on Dynasty Daddy, and Fantasy Calc's values. So I went and looked at all these sources, and based on that, it seems like these are all reasonable swaps that you could make. Now, every league has its own micro market. It has its 12 managers that value players a certain way, which means a lot of these trades, they might not be possible in your specific league. I'm certainly not making any guarantees there, but hopefully this will give you some idea of how I'm valuing 2025 first right now. And regardless, you can still benefit from the player analysis. Now, for this exercise, let's just assume we're talking about Superflex, PPR, tight end premium leagues. And I'm not going to rehash any of the players from my sells video a few weeks ago. I'm going to have all new names today, but if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend checking it out. Okay, for the 101, you're going to get two players because trading for the 101 is a really tough ask right now. And the truth is, in the majority of leagues, you're going to get shut down if you go to the manager that got last place, got the 101, and has been thinking and dreaming and fantasizing about Ashton Genty for the last few months. It's just probably not going to happen. But there are some completed trades in the Dynasty Daddy trade database, so I know that there are people out there that are trading the 101. And there are going to be some teams that are holding the 101 that are in really rough shape, which is why they have the 101 in the first place. And some of those managers might feel like adding a running back isn't the right move right now, right? Storing a lot of their value in a volatile position like running back, maybe that's not their preferred approach. And in that case, they might be interested in trading for a safer asset, specifically a quarterback. And if you look at the startup ADP, you look at the Fantasy Calc values, I think CJ Stroud and Jordan Love are two players that personally, I'd be happy to trade for the 101 right now. On Fantasy Calc, we've got CJ Stroud all the way up at 17th overall still, despite a pretty poor 2024 season. The 101 is ranked as the 28th overall asset, and Jordan Love is sitting at 30th. The startup ADP is pretty similar, although Jordan Love is a few spots lower there. Either way, this isn't to say that I'm worried about Love or Stroud. I think they're both good quarterbacks. They're going to have long and successful careers. I'm just a little skeptical that they're going to be productive enough to separate from that next tier of quarterbacks. The JJ McCarthy, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, even Michael Penix. You look at last year's finishes for them. CJ Stroud was actually the QB 28 in points per game among all quarterbacks with 5+ starts, 13.9 points per game. That's just downright bad. Like, that's not even serviceable. That's unstartable production. Jordan Love was better. He was the QB 17 at 16.3 points per game. These are not special numbers. They're not even really good numbers. Now, of course, we're not just going to copy paste last year's stats into the future. Both of these guys were much better in the previous season in 2023. Love was the QB 7 at 19.6 points per game, and Stroud in his rookie year was QB 9 at 19 points per game. So they've had better seasons, and I think they're going to have more seasons in the future that are similar to 2023. But there's no guarantee we're getting that in 2025. And my real concern here is just that the ceiling isn't much higher than that. I don't know how they get much higher than those 2023 numbers, because CJ Stroud, he averaged about 13.7 rushing yards per game last year. Jordan Love averaged just 5.5. They're not adding anything for you on the ground. For these guys to get up into that 20+ point per game range, you know, where you can actually be a top 5 scoring quarterback on the season, they basically need to lead the league in pass attempts, or they need to have kind of an outlier touchdown season where their touchdown rate just spikes through the roof like we saw from Baker Mayfield last year. That's really, really hard to predict. So I think you look at Ashton Genty, on the other hand, who you're going to be able to get at the 101. I think he has a much better chance of being a difference maker at his position, even as a rookie. Because you think about the running back landscape, which young running backs right now are we really confident can provide league-winning production right now in 2025? Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, come to mind. Maybe Breece Hall can get back into that level, but of course, his situation is really murky. Then you have Devon Achane, Bucky Irving. Those guys have some question marks about either their offenses or their size or their roles. So a young potential superstar running back in Ashton Genty is just going to be a more scarce and more impactful asset than somebody like Stroud or Love, who I think are more steady, low-end QB1 types. Next up, we have the 102, and I'd be comfortable trading away Garrett Wilson to get this pick. I've been a huge fan of Garrett Wilson since he came into the league. I thought 2024 was going to be his big breakout season. Aaron Rodgers was finally going to be the quarterback that could unlock his potential. It didn't really happen. He scored 14.8 points per game, finished as the wide receiver 18. Those were both career highs, but they still weren't very impactful, certainly didn't match up to his ADP. Garrett Wilson is obviously super talented. I don't know why anybody would debate that at this point. He's had 147 or more targets in every year of his career so far. He averages over 9 targets per game in his career. That doesn't happen by accident. The guy gets open, he gets targeted. Unfortunately, he has been plagued by poor quarterback play and dysfunctional offenses his entire career, and that seems pretty unlikely to change in 2025. The Jets just do not have an answer at quarterback. They're moving on from Rodgers, who himself wasn't the answer. The rookie class is poor, and they don't even have an early enough pick to get Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, if those guys are answers. The free agent market is barren. I don't think Sam Darnold is looking forward to a reunion with the New York Jets. Not that I think that would even go well, but beyond that, there really aren't any options. Justin Fields certainly wouldn't be an upgrade for Garrett Wilson's fantasy prospects. Unless the Jets are going to somehow land Matt Stafford, which I think is pretty unlikely, I just don't see a world where Garrett Wilson finds himself with a real quarterback upgrade in 2025. And that's just a problem for his dynasty value because he's going to be 25 in July. And I'm not saying that 25 is old for a wide receiver, but he's not young enough anymore to just justify retaining his value indefinitely while we wait for fantasy points to come. He is going to have to actually produce at some point to hold on to this type of valuation. And I'm becoming less and less confident that that's going to happen in the near future. So at this point, I would rather re-roll Wilson into the 102, get the wide receiver one of this class in Ted McMillan, who's going to probably get top 10 draft capital, has a good profile in himself, and he's going to have more immediate value upside, I think, than Garrett Wilson. Or you can just hold that pick for a couple of months. I think you'd be able to flip it come rookie draft time for something that's maybe a little more exciting or is going to score more points for your team. Next up, we have the 103, and I'd be looking to trade Jonathan Taylor for this pick. He's still a very good running back. We saw that last year. He's efficient. He can handle a lot of volume. He was the RB7 in points per game last year at 17.6, but he's also 26, and in the past 3 years, he hasn't come anywhere close to the 22 points per game that he scored way back in 2021 when he had 20 total touchdowns. He hasn't topped 12 touchdowns in any other season of his career, and he's been under 2 receptions per game each of the last 2 years. So again, he's a good player, but I think at this point his dynasty value is just being propped up by his name, by his 2021 season way back, and his hot finish to the 2024 season. He was good in the fantasy playoffs, had some great performances there, but I do think that his value is inflated because of that. He's not going to gain any dynasty value from here, and any kind of league-winning upside that people think he has is really just hypothetical at this point. He's really not that different from Josh Jacobs or even Kenneth Walker, who both go much later in drafts. So give me the 103 over Jonathan Taylor pretty easily. At worst, you're going to be getting the RB2 in the class here. And you might even get Ted McMillan in some leagues if we see somebody like Amari and Hampton go in the first round to a decent landing spot. So I like the upside of this pick here a lot more than Jonathan Taylor. I would trade Rome Odunze for the 104. And his ADP right now, his value right now in Dynasty really shows you how devalued 2025 picks are relative to 2024. You think about last year at this time, JSN was coming off his own disappointing rookie season. It was actually quite similar to Odunze's in a lot of ways, where he had these 2 other players he was competing for targets with. He was inefficient on a per out basis. At that time, you could get JSN for a late first. And I was wrongly telling people not to do that. But it's crazy to see now Odunze's startup ADP is actually ahead of the 103. So he's being valued, at least relative to the rookie class, way ahead of where JSN was last year. The market seems extremely confident in a year 2 breakout for Odunze. And I can understand why. It seems kind of like the stars are aligning for him, with Ben Johnson coming to run the show, Keenan Allen most likely moving on, Caleb Williams going into his year 2 as well. It all makes sense. I'm not writing it off as a possibility that Rome Odunze can improve and have a year 2 breakout similar to what we saw from JSN. I just disagree with the level of certainty that's being implied here. I'm not going to make the same mistake that I made with JSN. I would absolutely go out and buy Rome Odunze today for a late first. I'd probably even send a mid first. But I think at the 104, you are locking yourself into an awesome prospect who's going to have that rookie insulation built in. To say what you want about Rome Odunze, he has had a somewhat disappointing rookie season, and that just makes his floor inherently lower. Because if he struggles, if he fails this year, even if he suffers an injury this year, he is going to have a harder time maintaining or recovering that value than we would see from a rookie. And I think you're going to get a rookie who has similarly high odds to succeed, to be a productive player in the league. So for me, I think it's an easy call to just go with the 104 here. Moving on to the 105 now, I'd be looking to trade Jared Goff for this pick. I called him out as a bad startup pick last offseason, and he proceeded to have a career year, finishing as the QB7 and making me look pretty stupid. I am willing to double down here, though, because I don't think he's going to be able to replicate that success in 2025. He was a full 2 points per game higher last year than any of his other Detroit seasons, mostly because he saw his touchdown rate spike all the way up to 6.9%. That was a top 10 touchdown rate over the last 5 seasons, and not only were Jared Goff's touchdowns up, the Lions also scored the most touchdowns per game of any team since the Packers in 2020. We should expect that number to regress significantly, no matter what, really. But the departure of Ben Johnson really doesn't help matters there. So I just think this offense has to come back down to earth. It has to come back to the real world, and that's going to result in fewer passing touchdowns for Goff. Doesn't mean he's going to suddenly be a bad fantasy quarterback or anything, but I think he's going to be more in that low-end QB1, high-end QB2 range. And to me, that's just not worth a top 5 or 6 pick in this class. All right, I love Devonta Smith. He's one of my absolute favorite real-life players, but I'd be happy to ship him off for the 106 in this class. I think what he brings to the table in Dynasty is a little bit overvalued right now. He's consistently a 14 to 15 points per game guy when you look over the last 3 seasons, and that's a useful player, but it's not all that different from guys like Jacoby Myers, Cortland Sutton, and Jerry Jeudy, who are all significantly less valuable, and we see wide receivers like that emerge from basically out of nowhere like every single year, right? So when he was still early in his career, that was fine. That type of production was fine because you also had this hypothetical upside that was factored into his dynasty value where maybe he can continue to improve or maybe his situation can change. At 26, he pretty much just is what he is. The Eagles are a run-heavy team with a true alpha wide receiver in A.J. Brown. That's just going to limit Devonta Smith regardless of his talent, and that situation is not set to change anytime soon. So I will gladly take the value and production upside of the 106 here, which is at worst going to get you either a top 2 wide receiver in this class or a top 3 running back in this class, because I feel pretty confident that we're going to see at least one quarterback, probably Cam Ward, lock in a top 5 rookie ADP. So that's going to leave you one of these high-end running backs or wide receivers at the 106. At the 107, I honestly almost switched to a different name because I thought there's just no way that people actually value Derrick Henry over the 107. But that's what the startup ADP says. That's how he's ranked on Fantasy Calc. I have to assume that it's happening. It's just not happening in my leagues. But it might be happening in your league. There might be people out there in your leagues that are still that high on Derrick Henry. I think that's pretty insane behavior. I understand Derrick Henry was amazing last year. He scored almost 20 points per game, and that's great. He's also 31 years old, and he plays running back, and he's never going to be more valuable than he is right now. The risk of decline is incredibly high. Even a minor injury at this point would significantly impact his dynasty value. So personally, I would sell him for any first-round pick. I would take literally any first-round pick right now for Derrick Henry. But you don't have to agree with that because that's not how he's valued. And I think the 107 is an absolute no-brainer. You are just going to get straight up a really good player there. You might get Tyler Warren. You might get Caleb Johnson. You might get Luther Burden. I don't care. Just give me the pick. Give me the rookie 108 over Jameson Williams, who's about to turn 24, just coming off of his first good season. Just over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns in 15 games last year, scored 14.2 points per game, which was 23rd at the position. He really stepped up in a big way after he was largely written off, including by me. I did not really have any faith in this type of a breakout from him, and he proved me wrong. But for me, this comes back again to the Lions offense and expected regression. Jameson Williams, he plays a downfield role, which means he wasn't really much of a target earner in 2024. He only had a 20% targets per out run, 17.6 target share overall. And that makes sense for a player with an A dot like that. But he needs to be really efficient at turning those downfield shots into big plays to maintain just this level of production, which is fine. Low end wide receiver 2 is something, but it's not really moving the needle for you. And I don't see a lot of room for his target share to grow when you're sharing an offense with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, and Jahmyr Gibbs. So it's not that I'm necessarily worried about Williams from a floor standpoint. He proved last year he's a good player. He's going to have some big games mixed in. But I think even at the 108, you're going to be able to get a rookie with a strong profile that's likely in a less crowded situation, has a clearer path to potentially impactful production. With the news that Deebo Samuel is going to be moving on, I think there's some rekindled interest in Dynasty for Brandon Ayuk, and I'd be looking to capitalize on that. I'd happily sell him for the rookie 109. I don't really get the hype. Brandon Ayuk is about to turn 27 years old. He's coming off an ACL tear, and he has a career best season of 15.6 points per game. That was the wide receiver 16. He did that back in 2023 when he, granted, was extremely efficient, over 3 yards per out run, but still wasn't a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, and he wasn't anywhere near that level of production last year before he got hurt. Even without Deebo Samuel on the team, you've still got Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey to contend with. I think there's just way too much that has to go right for Brandon Ayuk to gain significant value in Dynasty or to be a meaningful fantasy contributor. And frankly, I would much rather have the 109. I'd even rather have the 110. And speaking of the 110, I'd be pretty happy if I could move Joe Mixon for that pick right now. Now, Joe Mixon, he had a nice resurgence with the Texans last year, 17.2 points per game, RB9. That's really useful production. He was a useful player for people that could get him, especially because he was being discounted. He was gettable for like a mid-second round pick last offseason. Now he's become much more expensive. He's going into his age 29 season, and he's not a Saquon or a CMC type of player where the massive ceiling balances out the increased risk that comes with an older running back like this. To me, he's really more of like fancy James Conner, which is a player that I'm happy to roster, but at this value, I would just rather have the pick. Someone is going to fall here to the 110 because looking at this class, we've got at least 4 really intriguing running backs. We have 3 or potentially 4 wide receivers, depending on Travis Hunter. We've got 2 quarterbacks and we've got 2 really good tight ends. That's already 12 names, right? That's already enough to get you through the first round. But remember last year, Ladd McConkey wasn't even on anyone's radar as a first rounder at this time before the combine. So there's going to potentially even be late risers that move up into this range that's going to push talent down even further. So I think these late first, 110, 111, 112 could still gain quite a bit of value over the next couple months. I would rather have that pick than an older running back in Joe Mixon. We've just got 2 picks to go here. At the 111, my suggested player to trade is Jayden Reed. Early last season, Jayden Reed was looking like the next breakout star at wide receiver, and then he just kind of fell off the map. From week 10 on, he averaged under 30 receiving yards per game. He had just a 14% target share. He just never developed into a full-time wide receiver. He was only running 69% of the routes last year, and he was still only getting on the field in 11 personnel, even when Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs were missing time. So yeah, the occasional big plays are fun, and I think his start to last year, where he was breaking off those big plays on what felt like a weekly basis, is really buoying his dynasty value right now. He seems like a guy that deserves more opportunity, but I just don't see how what we got from him for over half the season, I don't see how he can be worth a first round pick right now. I would much rather re-roll him into one of these other prospects. And finally, let's talk about Jalen McMillan, who I would gladly trade for the 112. Now, it might be too late to cash out Jalen McMillan for first round value, especially with Chris Godwin looking more likely to return to the Buccaneers, but I think it's at least worth trying because some people really were enamored with his end of the season. And it was a good end to the season. It wasn't crazy. You know, his peripheral numbers weren't out of this world or anything. It was largely touchdown driven, but you look at the rookie sample as a whole, you look at the full season, it doesn't really scream future superstar to me. Jalen McMillan feels like a guy where his absolute ceiling is to be like a Jordan Addison, Devonta Smith type of guy, and the floor is obviously much, much lower than those guys. So maybe you can squeeze out a 112. maybe you can add a little piece onto him to get that pick. For what it's worth, I would happily trade him even for an early second. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. As always, thanks so much for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my Dynasty content and you want to see more of it in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you want even more bonus content from me, if you're interested in things like my top 200 Dynasty rankings, weekly members-only live streams, and private channels in the Pure Potential Discord, consider hitting the join button under this video or the link in the description to become a YouTube member today. That is hands down the best way that you can support the channel, and I think it adds a lot of value as well. Either way, I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video, and I hope I'll see you then.